Hi everybody, I'm Joey Paul, I'm an indie author, and this is the first booktube video of February. Today I'm going to be talking about finding an editor. I've got some questions that I've been asked, so some of them are pretty simple, like where do I find an editor, how do I know if they're the right editor, what does an editor do, and other questions like that. So I thought I'd go through them one by one and give you some pointers on finding an editor that works for you. Number one, where do I find an editor? See, I found my editors through basically connections, but there are so many different ways you can find them. Like social media, a lot of editors these days, especially if they're indie editors, will have a social media page on Facebook or Twitter or even Tumblr, and you can search for those with the editor tag and find someone that works for you. Or you can go the other way, looking for websites through a Google search or a Yahoo search or whatever you use to search, and you can find them that way. Another way is through using other writers, asking them, who did you use to edit your book and stuff like that. And that basically means using your connections to find somebody that will work for you and will have the effect that you want them to have. So second question, how do I know if they're the right editor? You can check to see whether they'll do your genre. Like, you don't want to be hiring an editor that doesn't do young adult if you're writing young adult, because that kind of defeats the purpose. But if they are somebody who writes young adult, then you're in the right area. You can ask for references. Most editors will have some kind of references, even if they're just starting out, they'll have somebody that will be able to say what their work is like, and that's a very good way to find out if they're the right fit for you. You'll want to check their prices, see whether or not they're the industry standard or whether or not they're too expensive or too cheap. Too cheap can sometimes mean that they're just desperate for clients and they're starting out, and that can be a good thing, but it can also mean that they don't do a thorough job, which is a bad thing. Too expensive depends on what you class as too expensive. Most editors have a similar range of how much it costs. It costs me about between £200 to £300 to get a book edited. And that's basically the standard that I've come to know. So depending on the length of the book, because we do it by word count, not all editors do, it will depend on how much they charge and whether or not you think that's too expensive or that's just right or whatnot. The other good thing you really need to work out is you need to make sure you drive with each other, because an editor and the writer are going to be working really closely together. They're taking your manuscript and they're taking it apart and they're pointing out all the plot holes and the grammar and all the rest of it, and you need to be sure that they're someone you can work with. If they're not someone you can work with, then you shouldn't be afraid to say this isn't going to work out. A way to work out if you're going to jive with each other is to ask for a sample edit, usually a couple of chapters, maybe a bit less, and see what they do with it and see whether or not you can work with them. It's something that you really need to be very clear about, because if you're working with an editor that you don't jive with, it can create headaches and problems down the editing process, and you don't want that. You need to know what you want from an editor. You need to know what you're wanting them to give you. Do you want them to give you reasons for why they're saying this bit needs to go? Do you need to give them reasons why they're saying you should take this scene out or put this scene in? And depending on whether you're an underwriter or an overwriter, you need to have someone's opinion who you can trust. And if you don't jive with the editor, that can be a really bad way to get into the editing process. It can take months to find an editor that works for you, but you should never be afraid to say, yeah, this isn't working, I'm going to go to somebody else. I've been lucky in the fact that I've had two editors that I've worked with. One is still my friend, and we parted ways just because she couldn't keep up with the work I was needing her to do. And the other, who I'm still working with now, we jive really well. We both have a similar view on what we're looking for. We both have a similar idea of where the books are going, and that's really, really good. And in that I have been very lucky. But that said, number 3, what does an editor do? They edit your manuscript, which should be pretty obvious, but there we go. So they'll be looking for grammar problems, they'll be looking for plot holes, they'll be checking that scenes need to be there, that it's not just a scene that doesn't move the plot forward, and they will be basically working with you to polish your manuscript up to publishing level. It won't be a quick sort of like glance over, oh it's fine, it's now published. There's several steps in the editing process, and editor is just one of them. Other people use less steps, some people use more. I'm somewhere in the middle. But when you go to an editor, you expect for it to go back and forth a few times before you actually get to the final edit. And even then, I employ another step, which I'll talk about in another video. I employ a proofreader after the edit's gone through, and even then it takes a while to get the final product. And that's what an editor does. They basically work your manuscript and turn it into the polished piece that ends up published. The one thing I really want you to remember is that their advice is just that, advice. You retain control of whether or not to follow that advice. If you choose not to follow that advice, be aware that it can bite you in the arse, because the editor usually doesn't make those decisions lightly, or they shouldn't make those decisions lightly. That said, do expect to get a lot of red pen. That's the point. They are taking apart everything you've written and they're putting it back together, but you are the one that retains control, and you are the one that has to put it back together. If you decide that, hey, the editor said this scene doesn't need to be here, but you decide actually it does, then either you have to defend that to yourself, if nothing else, or you have to leave it in, and then realise that if the readers are then saying this scene didn't need to be there, that's on you. Editors are basically there to make sure that your book is as polished as possible. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to get in touch with me, you can leave a comment below, or you can find me on Twitter, on Goodreads, on Tumblr or Facebook. My books are available on Amazon in ebook and paperback, and don't forget to check out the Dark Side of Fiction 2017. The links for all are listed below, and I will see you next time. Bye!